The opinions expressed in this program are not those of CISA 7 or Time Warner Cable.
We educate all students to be college, career, and community ready, inspired to succeed in our diverse world.
I'd like to just let members of the public know that if you are interested in viewing the board agenda and handouts online, as well as minutes from past meetings, you can visit our district website at www.gbaps.org. You click on our district and then Board of Education. And on the left menu, under Board of Education, you will find a link to agendas and minutes. This link will take you to a website called Neptune, where all board agendas, minutes, and handouts from board meetings are housed. Next is our open forum. This is a time for members of the community to speak before the board. Is there anyone who would like to speak before the board this evening? Seeing none, then we will move to our roll call. Sandy?
Becker?
Here.
Short?
Here.
Maloney?
Here.
McCoy?
Here.
Wickenthal?
Here.
Wagner?
Excused?
Warren?
Here.
Sinclair?
Here. We have 6 board members present. We are also joined at the table to my left by Dr. Michelle Langenfeld, our superintendent. To my right is Grace Sinclair from Preble High School. She's president of the Intercity Student Council. And to my far left is Sandy Heller, our board secretary. Next, I would entertain a motion, and then is Lucas coming? I see him on the list. No, he's not able to come. Okay. I'd entertain a motion for approval of the following minutes. Regular board meeting, November 20th, 2017. Special board meeting, closed sessions, November 20th and December 4th, 2017.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. Next is our monitoring reports, and that will be facilitated by Laura McCoy. I'll turn that over to her.
We're going to be hearing regarding our school report card.
As they approach the bench, if I
Yes.
could just offer a few comments. The state report card, this is the second year of the forward exam, and tonight's look is a very high level of what's actually in the report card. And you'll see from a district perspective that we are making some progress in some areas. I think we would all agree that this is a high-level overview, that we are actually really looking deep into the data, school by school, so that we have a better understanding of what is going on in each school, because we have some very bright spots, but we have areas of significant concern as well. And I think one of the conversations that we've been really having, and I know that the executive directors who have oversight of the schools have already been engaging in conversation directly with Dr. Stramp and with Mr. Miller, and really trying to say, what are the data really telling us? Why are we seeing improvement in some schools, particularly around growth and closing gaps, and in other places it seems to be not progressing? One of the things that doesn't come out, and I think Mr. Miller, you'll speak to that, is the fact that we have 9 school districts in Brown County. 3 of them made progress, and we were one of them. So again, seeing improvement is something that we always look for, and that area of growth. And then once this high-level look is brought forward to the board tonight, our intention then in January is to bring a much deeper dive in so that the board and our community can understand the action steps that are really that are being taken to address individual schools and some of the variations. I know that we have some assumptions right now about what we're seeing. I know that, for example, at Fort Howard, which is a school that many of you may recall, has extended day, an extra half hour per day, and an extended school year. They go through the entire month of June. You see some significant growth as well as closing of gaps, and that's something we're looking at as well. Then once the high level is addressed tonight, you'll be able to drill deeper into that, because we also have, and Diane Dersch is at the table, to talk a little bit about a data dashboard, and the Board of Education data dashboard that provides you with live data, not static anymore, that you'll be able to really drill down school by school and see significant information about your schools that you support school across the district as well. So that's kind of the second part. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Magus, our Associate Superintendent, and he can introduce his team and go from there.
Sure, and I just wanted to say thanks again for allowing us to share the school report card information. And as Dr. Langenfeld explained, this is in many ways the what of the report card. What were the scores? And the next meeting we'll be going more deeply into the why. Why do we feel that these scores were the scores that we received, both the highlights and some of the areas where there might have been significant change, need for some changes there. Then we would hope to, after that, address the how. How are we going to change? What are the pieces that we're going to put in place as far as our recommendations moving forward? But again, we'd like to have Dr. Stramp, Ms. Dersch, and Mr. Miller explain from their perspectives where we are within the report card. So again, this is the what. Next time is the so what, and then the now what. This is a point for the data to inform us. So this is a clear definition at a high level of what is our current reality.
Okay. So we'll move into the presentation. Just a quick reminder of the data that makes up our school report cards. 4 priority areas: achievement, growth, closing gaps, and then on track and post-secondary readiness. Those are the 4 priority areas on the report card. The data that populates the report card is WKCE, Badger exam, forward exam data, ACT plus writing, dynamic learning maps assessment, graduation rates, attendance, and schools can also receive deductions for dropout rate and chronic absenteeism. If you will, those are all the things that go into the stew that makes the report card. Typical weighting for a school, 50% of a total weight would come from student achievement and student growth for elementary, middle, and district report cards, 40% from student achievement for a high school, 25% for closing gaps for elementary, middle, and district, and 25% for on track for elementary, middle, and district. High schools are a little different. 40% of their score comes from closing gaps, and then 20% from on track and post-secondary readiness. Something to keep in mind with Green Bay's report card and report cards around the state, they use a system called variable weighting at DPI, and they weight the report cards more heavily in student growth the higher your economically disadvantaged population is. So for Green Bay, because our economically disadvantaged population was reported out at 57.7%, that meant that growth counted for 40.1% of our overall score, whereas student achievement counted for 9.9%. Those are the 2 categories, achievement and growth, that will slide from district to district and school to school depending on the overall economically disadvantaged population of the school.
What's the range on that? Just within Green Bay?
I want to say like 3 or 4% at one of our schools, to almost 100% at some of our schools. It does cap out at, I think I have that in my notes, 65. So once you reach 65%, it doesn't shift anymore. And the most that student growth can count is 45% of your overall score. So for our schools that are 65% economically disadvantaged or greater, the student growth category counts for 45% of their overall score.
Okay, and if we had a school that had 0 free and reduced,
Then 45% of their overall score would come from student achievement and only 5% from growth.
Okay.
It would swing all the way the other way.
And does that apply to the district as well?
That applies to the district, and this is actually, what I included in your slide is what the actual weighting for the district report card is. So in our case, 9.9% comes from student achievement, 40.1% of our overall weight on our report card comes from our growth, and then 25 and 25 for closing gaps and on-track and post-secondary readiness.
Is this another change in the, is this another significant change in the formula from last year?
It's consistent with last year, although I don't think it was well explained last year. They told us they were going to use variable weighting, and they also used, they used a different measurement for growth last year as well. And so I think in the wash of everything, I don't think people had a clear understanding of the impact of variable weighting, so we weren't able to give you as much information last year about the variable weighting. This year we have a much better handle on the variable weighting scale.
And when is the last time, and if it's before your time in this position, that wouldn't be surprising actually, but when would be the last time we've had a good 2 or 3 years in a row of the same rules and scoring system?
So since the report cards were developed, I don't think we've had 3 years in a row. I would say this does represent 2 years in a row with the same rules, but different data. The problem with the report cards last year is they used growth from the Badger exam to the forward exam. And this year they actually have forward to forward. So it's getting better, but it's still not consistent year to year. And the thing to keep in mind is we still had 2 years of WKCE data that were used in the closing gaps measurement this year. So that will gradually drop off. The 1 year of the Badger exam will drop off. Quite honestly, it'll probably be another 3 years before we have a tool that I can say with certainty is the same from year to year.
And I would say one of the ways that changes like this that are not known to us going in, when the rules change, it affects our performance. For instance, last year we had really, really significant effort made to make sure every individual student took the ACT because there was sometimes some kids don't necessarily want to take the ACT, but we really, really pushed for participation because that was a factor. So there may have been kids taking the ACT that might have been less than excited about taking it. This year that wasn't a factor, and we had many kids there because we did individual home visits and things of that nature. Not to say that that's a bad thing. I think it's good for us to encourage everyone to take the ACT because I think it's an important next step for university. But it also, if we're having a greater number of kids take it than might have taken it previously because we're trying to push for high enrollment or high participation, that's a rule change that affected us in an odd way. So we're looking forward to the state having more consistent rules of the game, so to speak.
Yeah, what Mr. Magus is referring to, last year we received deductions at 2 of our schools for ACT participation. So again, high effort was made to ensure that all students participated in the ACT plus writing. And this year the state dropped test participation as a potential deduction area. So again, I agree with Mr. Magus. We did the right thing in encouraging every student to participate in the assessment, but it is an example of a rules change that DPI implemented after testing was complete.
I mean, so DPI has some latitude, but ultimately the governor and legislature could and have directed differently as we've gone on from year to year with report cards.
Yeah, an example of that occurred when the legislature directed DPI to stop administering the Badger exam and implement a new exam. That came down directly through legislation. And they also told DPI, the legislature passed a bill that gave us a 1-year hiatus on report cards. So we had a 1-year break from report cards as well. So it is possible at any time that the legislature could direct the Department of Public Instruction to change the report card makeup or change the report cards in some way.
Is this, this slide, the information on this slide, is this available school by school on the data dashboard or on the DPI? Okay.
Yep, there's
So we
actually,
see that impact
there's,
for school by school.
yep, there's a link that is available to follow. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds right now, but I can send the link out later where you can actually set all of these factors, and if it is a board request, we could certainly run the numbers for all of our schools and provide that so that you know what the weighting is for each of the schools.
Well, if there's a link for us to,
Yeah.
I mean, where we can grab
Yeah.
it, that'd be
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Okay. We'll follow up and get you that.
Thank you.
All right, and then I'll buy the numbers for you. On our report card, our overall score was 62.2, which does represent a 1.2 point increase from last year's report card. As Dr. Langenfeld shared with you, we were one of 3 districts in the county that experienced an increase in our report cards. All of the other districts either remained the same or experienced a slight reduction in their report card score from last year. We scored a 51.5 compared to a state average of 66.7 in student achievement, 53.7 compared to a state average of 66 in growth, 61.9 exceeding the state average of 61.7 in closing gaps, and an 80.4 compared to 86.5 in on-track and post-secondary readiness. And as you can note from this slide or looking at the district report card itself, the closing gaps measure is due a lot to our graduation rate gap closure, which is a testament to the work that our high schools and district staff have done over the last few years in increasing the number of students we have graduating from our high schools on time. As I mentioned, again, just overall going through, student achievement for us counted as 9.9% of our overall score. Growth was 40.1. Closing gaps was 25% of our overall score. And on-track and post-secondary readiness was 25% of our overall score. So if you're a fan of mathematics, and I was told to remove the slide where I actually had all the math in here, but if you wanted to, you could take the 51.5 and multiply it by 0.099, 53.7 and multiply it by 0.401, 61.9 multiply it by 0.25, and 80.4 multiply it by 0.25. Add those 4 numbers together, and you'll get our 62.2. Some additional information that's included on the front of the report card. District enrollment information, which does come from a snapshot that takes place in May. So it's different from our third Friday count. It's different from our second Friday count in January. DPI does take a look at the information we're providing to them about our students in May and takes a snapshot, and they use that to populate the report card data. Ms. McCoy, I think Dr. Langenfeld.
No, I'm sorry, Dr. Langenfeld.
Oh, go ahead.
Stephen, one of the things that has changed, and when Mr. Becker talked about changes, one of the things is how the state is now reporting out mobility. Can you address that so that folks can understand? Because often we put a pretty large number out there, and this seems small as compared to what we experience. So if you could address that for us, that would be good.
Sure. Last year, DPI changed the way in which they calculate mobility. In the past, they calculated mobility as any move. So you could have a child who moved, like was at your school on September 3rd, left on September 10th, that would count towards your mobility. You could have a student, that same student could leave your school on September 10th, come back on November 12th. That would count as another student towards that mobility. So you could theoretically count a student multiple times towards your mobility count throughout the year. And that's the way in which DPI used to calculate mobility. The change they made, year and a half ago now. But the change they made to the way they calculate mobility now, they only look at students who are at your school after the third Friday in September. So they exclude any students that may have been at your school anytime prior to that third Friday count. And they only count each student once. So even though a student might have 2 or 3 moves in and out of a school, they'll be counted one time in that mobility count. So the mobility numbers that you now see on the report card are a lot, well, they're lower. Usually they're about a third of what we report out or what we see if we calculate using the old method. We're not quite ready to make that switch yet with the way our programming is set up, but we have explored trying to mimic what DPI is doing so that we have a better estimate towards mobility, even though we don't necessarily agree with DPI's new method for calculating it. It doesn't do anything to impact our overall scores, it's just another number that is reported out on the report card.
The student mobility is something that definitely adds to the degree of difficulty of instruction, and I think to suggest that we have, if we look at, if DPI is saying we have 2.7%, within district mobility, that doesn't seem to be anything that reflects the classroom reality of the teacher who, teachers at our schools who have told me that they've been in a kindergarten with 8 of the same kids from 20, and some of them stayed within Green Bay, some of them didn't, some left and came back. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd like, we certainly need to be aware of what the state is using, but as far as what rather than spending too much time trying to make our statistic look like whatever the DPI's statistic is until they're ordered to make a different statistic, I guess I'm more concerned with us keeping track of, how are we helping our mobile students and families, either who move within our district or who join us later in the year.
Sure.
We agree, and that's the way we approach it on a child-by-child basis, but also systemically. We look at the reality of some pretty high mobility.
And, our schools are disproportionately affected by that, obviously. There are some schools with much higher mobility rates than others, and it's something to keep in mind. So that classroom that you talk about having only 8 students out of 20 from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, we do have schools and classrooms like that around the district.
And we don't, obviously if students either have some growth with us, but then their family moves before the next testing, then that's not captured in the growth. That is an increasing component of our report card score. So those kids who grew with us and the family moved away doesn't count. And then also, I would assume the student who comes to us after the first test and has quite a bit of growth with us, that also won't be counted in our growth number.
So to speak specifically about growth, because I think it's fair to go down that road, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, in populating the report cards, uses students in attendance on third Friday for student growth. So if the child had a forward exam anywhere in the state and they were at one of our schools, since we already said Fort Howard, let's say Fort Howard, maybe they were at a different school, but over the summer they moved and they started the year at Fort Howard. Third Friday in September they were at Fort Howard. They took the test in April at Fort Howard. They would count in Fort Howard student achievement and their growth calculation.
Based on their October score from wherever else they were in Wisconsin?
Well, so with the DPI, they only use the forward exam and they only administer the forward exam in the spring. So they would use the previous spring. So let's say it was a 4th grader who moved to us from Wausau. And while they were in Wausau, they took the forward exam as a third grader at Wausau Elementary. And then they moved to Green Bay over the summer. They were at Fort Howard on the third Friday in September. They stayed at Fort Howard and they took the test in April. They would be counted in our growth calculations for Fort Howard and for the district. As long as they're at that school on the third Friday in September and they take the test in April at that same school, they count in the growth calculations. They would also count in the student achievement calculations.
So if the student took the test in April in Wausau, they moved to Chicago, and then they came back after the third Friday, maybe one day after, maybe 3 days after the third Friday, take it with us, have a great deal of growth, there's still no...
We wouldn't get any credit for the growth, and that student would not count in our student achievement score if they were not here on the third Friday.
Do you know how many students we have at the end of the year who were not here on the third Friday?
Off the top of my head, no, but I can certainly get that number for you if that's something you'd like to know and follow up.
I think, I've studied a lot about
Yeah.
data analysis and research, and it just, I feel bad saying something so cynical, but it's almost like the formula doesn't let us count some of what we do the best at. You know, and I'm not afraid to take a hard look at where are we doing a good job, where are we not doing a good job, but there's a lot of, I sometimes have a hypothetical situation in a board meeting that's a little bit out there, but these weren't really among those, right? A student going from Wisconsin to Illinois and back to Wisconsin after the third Friday, and now they don't count at all. They don't call, if we did a great job with them and they made growth and achievement, they're not in that number. And if we didn't do our job and they didn't achieve, they're not counted against us either. So that's, I guess I like to see, and that's why I'm glad we're doing more with our own data, because that's where I put my trust rather than a formula. You know, if you really, if the state, if all the powers that be truly cared about how these mobile students are doing, certainly they would make that count in the data, and they just don't in their formulas.
And I agree, and just to reiterate, the district report card and the state report cards that we have are a way of measuring how schools are doing. They are not by any means the only way that we look at it. In fact, there are, because of some of those changing of rules, it presents a slippery slope sometimes with the accuracy. But it is the public way of reporting schools, and it is a mechanism for us to look, and it is a cross-section of how we're doing. So we do look at it on a regular basis, but we don't, we look at it within the scope of several other measures to make sure that we have a more accurate view of what the current reality is. Because you're right, Mr. Becker, if there are things that are left out for simplicity's sake or whatever it may be that they're doing for the mobility rate or changing the ACT rates or whatever it may be, those make it so that it's difficult to use as a constant measure, and that's something that's important to us for continuous improvement.
All right. So continuing our theme by the numbers here, this year we had 2 of our schools hit the significantly exceeds category as opposed to 1 school last year. 10 schools exceed expectations as opposed to 6 schools last year. 11 in the meets expectations as opposed to 14 last year. 9 in meets few as opposed to 12 last year. And 4 in fails to meet compared to 4 last year. We did have 3 schools that were listed as alternate accountability, We had one additional school in addition to Bayview and Minoka, and that was John Dewey Academy of Learning. And John Dewey Academy of Learning was listed as an alternate because they didn't have a high enough cell size. They didn't have enough testers to receive a regular report card, so we had to do alternate accountability with them. Doesn't have anything to do with the kind of schooling that's taking place or how they're doing. It's just a simple matter of they did not have enough students that participated in the state assessment to provide a report card. If you're curious how things shook out, we did have 12 schools that improved their rating category. I won't read through each of those individually because I know you have a copy of the presentation. I will say that we had 5 schools move into the exceeds category, 4 that moved up to meets, and 2 that moved up to meets few, and of course McCullough that moved into the significantly exceeds category this year. We did have 21 schools that kept the same rating, and that could mean that their overall score improved a little bit or went down a little bit, but they stayed in the same rating category. So there's a range of scores that they could have within there, and these are all schools that moved around within that range. We had one school that remained in the significantly exceeds category. That was Leonardo da Vinci. Coincidentally, Leonardo da Vinci was the highest scoring school in the state. They were number 3 last year. As far as their overall score, and they did move up to the highest scoring school in the state. We had 5 schools that are in the exceeds expectations category and stayed there. 7 remained in the meets, 6 remained in meets few, and 2 remained in the fails to meet expectations category. We did have 3 schools that dropped in their rating. Jefferson moved from meets expectations to meets few, and we had 2 schools move into the fails to meet expectations category from meets few, and that was Dan's and Eisenhower.
Did any of these schools move more than one category in either direction?
Yeah, I think Dan's and Webster. I want to say Eisenhower moved 2, but I could be wrong. I think they were in our meets few and they moved to fails to meet. But yeah, Webster experienced a significant swing. And I actually had that in my scoring caution. I'm going to jump a couple slides ahead. I just wanted to mention that DPI did notice it wasn't just a Green Bay phenomenon. We had a few schools that had some large fluctuations, 10 points or more. It isn't what you would normally expect. When we talk in statistics as far as standard deviations and things that are kind of outside of the norm, the 3 schools that we had that had larger than expected swings, Dan's, Eisenhower, and Webster. In Webster's case, it was to the good. I know they did a lot of work over there, and they experienced a great upswing. We are still exploring what happened with Dan's and Eisenhower, and I don't feel like I could speak to that today, but to try to find out why they dropped so significantly.
Oh, yes, Ron.
What is the other school that fails to meet expectations? What is the other school?
So the 4 schools that we had listed in the fails to meet expectations category are East, West, Dan's, and Eisenhower.
Thank you.
So there's still definite room for growth, and again, this is our public measure, but in general, we saw a pretty significant move towards positive growth by a larger number of schools than dropped. So while we are never satisfied, and there's definitely more work to be done, that's something that we'll discuss in greater detail in January. It's a positive note to have these many schools going up in school.
The next slide, slide 19, takes just a little bit of explanation, if you will. You can see the overall accountability and different priority areas. And what you're seeing there is kind of a range of scores. So the low score for our schools, high score for our schools, and then the average or the mean score for our schools. And then there's, of course, the maximum score. The low and the high score give you a sense for how wide of a range our schools scored in those specific categories. For instance, in 2016-17, you can see in student achievement, we had one school in the district that had a 24.4 in that category, and we had one school in the district that had a 100 in that category. So quite a wide range. The average was 52.8 for all of our schools. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide unless people have specific questions. I wanted to be able, though, to provide enough definition so that you understood what you were looking at. Okay. We did have 2 schools that received deductions on the report card, both for chronic absenteeism. East and West High School received 5-point deductions for chronic absenteeism.
What is, what would be the current definition of chronic absenteeism? Because that, if I remember correctly, has changed a lot of
Sure.
times.
Yep. And so I think part of the confusion stems from the fact that DPI has looked at different kinds of attendance measures over the years, and even in this report card, they look at different kinds of attendance measures. If you're a high school or middle school, your goal is 95% attendance. That's what's considered, that's the threshold you want to hit for your attendance rate. A chronic absentee is an individual student who is present at the school less than 84% of the time. DPI says it in terms of being absent 16% or more of the time. And when they look at absences, they count any absence. So if a family goes on vacation for 20 days, those are all counted as absences toward being a chronic absentee. If a kid is, has a chronic illness and is out of school frequently and is not receiving school services during that time, that counts as absences towards chronic absenteeism. So, the definition DPI would give you is 16%, missing 16% of the school year. I always say present less than 84%, because I like to think of it in positive terms.
Okay, so that we're not in the situation anymore where we're, like, at one point, I think, skipping one class meant a whole day of absence. Now it's hour by hour.
So the way that DPI calculates attendance, they do half and whole days. So they ask districts to convert their periods to a half day or whole day. And our current definition is 3 periods counts as a half day, 6 periods counts as a whole day. So when we report attendance to the state, we try to be consistent with our neighbors. When we were looking at what everyone else was doing at one point in time, we were reporting one absence as a half day. And now we've, transitioned to reporting it similar to our neighbors are reporting it, and we look at 3 periods and 6 periods for half and whole days.
So if there's a student who has an extended illness and I guess it hasn't maybe reached the point where we're doing a separately defined program of education, like an official homebound program, but they're getting their homework packets and emailing with the teacher and so forth, is that still going to be a chronic absentee?
I would have to get more information on like a specific situation to be able to give you an answer to that question. DPI defines it as not receiving school services. So if there's some way of taking attendance during that time, I think, theoretically, it wouldn't be an absence.
But it is probably, I would think, unless we had done some kind of official steps to consider them a homebound student, right, which is rare and not a hoop you would jump through if a student had a unfortunate case of a 3-week recovery from an illness that they were coming back. Sure. They still might have done all their homework packets and whatnot. But again, we're not going to, I'm much more concerned about real truancy and non-medically excused situations, and this, again, just keeps muddying the water more.
It's not as clear as it could be, that's certain. All right, I already talked a little bit about some of the scoring and some of the fluctuations we had. Again, just a little additional information, our schools will be communicating scores out to parents in January. We do have letters translated now into Hmong, Somali, and Spanish in addition to the English letter, and each school's report card is also available on its school website. So I'm going to turn it over to John for a little bit, just to kind of talk about what next steps around the report card will be, and then I believe he'll be turning it over to Mr.
So as we, sorry. Thanks. And it's not super extensive, but basically, as I mentioned before, our progress monitoring in January will focus on some of the whys behind some of the scores so that we can dig a little deeper into what the results were and what they mean. And then in February, we'd be looking at what courses of action are we taking based on those scores. It's not that we're waiting till February to take action. We're in a state of continuous improvement where we're always looking at what is it that we're doing and how can we do better, but we can be more explicit about the individual areas. But we'd also invite the board to think of any questions that you may have so that we can better tailor our progress monitoring report based on your desires for information. Just as a for instance, Mr. Becker, you had some questions around attendance. That might be something that if we know ahead of time, we can make sure that we're well prepared with the information so that we can best meet your needs as a board. So if you can be thinking about those, and we can solicit that information so that we can tailor our progress monitoring in January and February to best meet your needs.
Who should we send the questions to?
I think it would probably be best if they come through Gwen. Gwen was shaking her head yes, so I think, or Sandy.
So any questions we have, we email them directly to you. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Thanks.
Thank
Katie?
you.
Will parents have the opportunity, will it be clear in the letter that goes out to parents, will they have the opportunity to submit questions and?
Yes, there's an opportunity, there's contact information, so if an individual has questions about our overall scores or the results of their child, they're always more than welcome to communicate with us, and we try and make sure that it's, I'm certain that they're translated, and here is Mr. Miller with additional information.
Yeah, so our process for that is to have them contact their principal first. Principals have received some training around interpreting their report cards and understanding their scores, and can also speak best to what the school is doing to address those different areas. When, a parent might ask a question that starts to get very generally the principals will contact me, and I'll either meet with them and the parent, or the parent will contact me directly. So we try to provide that kind of chain of communication for them.
And if there are enough questions and interest generated by the parents, will perhaps meetings be set up so that?
Yeah, the first time we had the school report cards, 5 years ago, we did host meeting opportunities. There hasn't been the mad rush to find out more about school report cards from our parents, but certainly I think if there was enough interest.
It's been longer than 5,
Yeah.
Steve. I was still working it.
Yeah, well, maybe it's been 6. But there really just hasn't. I think our buildings have done such a fantastic job of working with parents to help them understand how their child is doing on a regular basis, that when the school report cards come out, yes, it's a piece of information that I want to know as a parent. I kind of want to know how the general public views my school. But parents are much more concerned about what's happening with their child on a daily basis.
Brenda?
Will there be an opportunity to have a community engagement session regarding the report card?
That would be a question that would be beyond me. I'd certainly be willing to assist with that if that's something we move toward, but I think that would almost be a board directive. I could be wrong. I'll refer it back to Laura, since she's chairing this part of the meeting as far as an engagement session around the report cards.
Go ahead.
If I could offer, one of the things we do is take Stephen's PowerPoint, and I believe we already shared it with each of our schools. Where's Lori? We sent that out to all of our schools, correct? So that would be something, our next step then, is we would share that PowerPoint out. We've done that in the past with our various leadership around our PTOs so that they could share it with their staff, and, so we have that available. And I do think in my experience, and I don't know if that's changed, parents typically want to know about their own child. That seems to be of greatest interest. However, we've never done a public engagement. We've afforded each school and each school leader the ability to have those communications and conversations and then available. And that, I've not heard differently. And Lori, I don't know if you get any questions about the report cards or if that's something that the community. One of the things also that we're talking about is the state of the district, a conversation that we've had in the past with community and Lori and I agreed that, and I haven't even talked to anyone else about it, to tell our story, and this would be a piece of that story. I think the caution in the report card, again, is the recognition that we are not where we would want to be. However, we recognize that this is one point in time. I'm going to share shortly here a communication I received from a community member about the state report card, and I think that's of interest. But I would defer to the board in terms of expectations, but that's where we've typically gone, so.
Do we discuss that now, or do we put it on an agenda at a later date?
What are we discussing?
Look at our time.
And you had mentioned a community
Yeah,
engagement.
right.
Session, yeah.
Right.
Whether it's, there's, we could either do it as a state of the district.
Include it.
and-
As
which
part
would
of the
be-
state of the district.
Which we've done in the past, as opposed to just doing the, just the report card itself. What are people thinking? I know what I'm thinking, but I don't want to take over.
Is that scheduled? Is there a?
No, we want to schedule it. Lori and I just started talking about it sometime in March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would be certainly appropriate there, but I would also at the same time encourage anybody who is looking at this online later on or reading the minutes to contact us, contact anybody, particularly contact their school principals about any questions they have. There's a splash in the paper and it gets a lot of interest for a short while, but I think there are a lot of questions out there, and I do think they're answered best at the school level. Certainly, questions, at the district level overall would
Mr.
come to you folks.
Yeah, they could
but,
come, yeah.
Just, I think as a board, we should be encouraging people to ask those questions for further explanation. But as long as it would be part of an overall program that we'd be doing regarding state of the district, I think that's sufficient.
I think that's sufficient too.
That allows us to present that's what I was thinking too, it allows us to present the report card then, though, in context of what else is going on in the district.
Well,
because
and-
this is just a, one test, in terms of growth and achievement and gap closures, but there's other things that go on. I think it is good to have the sort of the whole picture of what's going on in our
Because a lot of
district.
people don't know that. They're not aware that there's a comprehensive body.
Right, right.
So there's
Yeah.
it's
Right.
misconception, and to clear that up would be ideal.
Yep, I agree, and I think that's a wise thing to say and recognize. I think that the piece, if I could offer, is that this would afford us the ability to not only tell the results, but also to talk about the action steps that are in place and moving forward. And again, we have some assumptions as to what's been going on. There is a tremendous body of work that people have been engaging in. There has been a lot of movement that we can see, not necessarily always in this particular exam, but Gwen will talk briefly about the STAR exam and the NCE scores where we see some shifts as well. But before we do that, I think one of the things that I'm very happy to share and report out is that we have for the Board of Education, not a static dashboard, but a dynamic dashboard. It is something that not all boards have, and in fact, as Diane and her team has been out building this with Wise-Local, the people in the consortium, the different school districts, have taken note and are going to provide their boards with dynamic dashboards as well, as a result of the work and the expectation of the board. Because so having that available to you will afford you the ability to really engage in the data and the schools you support or across the district, and should be able to answer more questions why without even having to pick up a phone. You'll be able to see that. So if I could, are we good to transition, or is that? Okay. All right, so I will stop now.
Okay, well, I tell you, I feel like this is that long-awaited dashboard that you have been asking for, and it's a very appropriate holiday gift for you. So I almost thought about bringing a bow to wrap this with. You know, their school report cards are one snapshot in time. So what we have done is created a more dynamic Board of Education dashboard so that you can have near real-time data. And I say near real-time because this information will be fed nightly to Wise-Local. So what you would be looking at would have taken place the day before, okay? We have created a very easy way for you to get there. We have created what I would call the Board of Education digital environment. So on the screen here, you see a screenshot of, I'll give you directions later on how to log in, later at another time, to how to log into the Launchpad. And that is a single sign-on environment. So once you get logged in, it will have buttons that you can press to get to different places. And so it will take you to Gmail, it can take you to the website, it can take you to Neptune, and also to Wise-Local. So that makes life a little easier for you. So with the press of a button, you can get to Wise-Local. And once you get there, you will see an interface that looks like this. There you go. Thanks, Stephen. Ta-da! And what you're looking at is the main page, and it's got some graphics on it as well. Along the left-hand side are areas that go along with the prioritized areas that we have taken a look at in our school district. You'll see that there are demographics that you'll be able to look at, as well as academic excellence. And within that, you'll be able to see some test scores and things. You'll see personalized pathways. And then you'll also see engagement, and that includes attendance and behavior. Okay, across the top of that, you'll be able to search. And so you can take a look at the schools of which you are responsible for. Because notice on the left-hand side, you can pull down the menu and you'll be able to see all the schools, and you could choose one or many of them. You can also see, you could filter by grades, ethnicity, gender, special ed, and EL as well. So that allows you then to take individual looks at your schools to see what how they're doing. We show things graphically here, and if you when you get in there, you'll see that you'll be able to see under the academic excellence area, you can break down by content area as well. So you'll be able to see different assessments and how students did within that, as well as NCE reading and math that come through the STAR reading and math scores. And you'll also see, if you are in charge of secondary, Aspire and ACT scores. So with that, once again, some of these things will change often. Other things will not. You'll be able to see, like I said, attendance, so you could take a look at attendance and you know how that compares to the day before or day after. And you can also take a look at behavior as well regarding number of incidents involved. So this is designed to be, once again, your overall look. We will eventually be adding more things, and Gwen will talk about that when she talks about NCE. But we're really feeling that this will be enough information to get you started. And so as you're looking through this, if you could, please jot down additional questions that you might have or information that you desire, so that we can address those things as John had talked about at a later date, and also think about revising, if needed, our Board of Education dashboard.
So you have another link on there too to the state assessment, so they can click on to the DPI
Yes, on
website.
That's right. On the left-hand side, we also have a live link that takes you out to the school report card, so that you don't have to leave your environment to go out to the website. You can just click on that link to get you right to the website that has all the school report cards. So again, we're hoping that this will give you a very clear indication of how things are going within your schools, and you should be able to then do the searches on your schools and sort them in ways that you would like. Are there any additional questions about that part? I want to let you know that if you have questions about the assessments themselves, Stephen Miller would be the person. If you have technical questions, how to access things, what to pull down, and those types of things, and when I communicate with you about how to get there, I will also include help desk, the help desk phone number and email address as well, so that you can get the technical assistance that you need for this too. Okay.
Then I think, Gwen, Dr. Stramp will, one of the things that we've been talking about is what are the other measures that we can predict what's going to happen on the state test? What are the things that we are monitoring? And I know Mr. Becker referenced basically, some of our internal monitors that are nationally normed, and this is the STAR. And so I know we've had the conversation with the board, but Gwen will provide just another overview to wrap it up.
Excellent, and good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to share the presentation about the school report card and our exciting new data dashboard. It's great. So as Diane was showing us, we had academic excellence on the left side of the screen, and if you were to select academic excellence, you would have the opportunity to look at the STAR normal curve equivalent, or the NCE. So the district utilizes Renaissance Learning, STAR Early Literacy, STAR Reading, and STAR Mathematics for the measurement of achievement and growth. Just as a refresher, STAR is a scientific, research-based, normed, standardized, time-adjusted model and a formative computer adaptive assessment. So we bring all that information together for you in a data view, and this is available to you through your dashboard, and we show you 3 screening windows. So for example, if we look at the image that's on the screen, the left side of the image shows the 3 screening windows from the 2016-2017 school year. On the right side, so that you could do a comparison from one year to the other, because through a normal curve equivalent, or an NCE, you can compare against grade levels, assessments, or school years. But on the right side of the screen then, you are seeing the current academic school year. And right now, we only have the fall screening window to show you. However, our winter or mid-year screening window will open, in January, and it will run through February 2018. And grades 4K through grade 12 will be completing their version of the STAR assessment. As board members and using your new dashboard, you'll be able to view the next screening window as the data is collected. As Diane mentioned, we have nightly feeds to WISE-Local, so this will be really as real-time as we can make it. So as the data is coming in and it's filling into the chart, you'll be able to monitor that. And as Diane showed, you can filter by grade, race, ethnicity, and again, you can go by which of the screening windows. So just a short refresher of how to look at the normal curve equivalent. The data represented, and if we look at just the fall for this current year, the data represented by the blue and green bars on the graph would be, or if you'd consider that to the right of a mark, that would be a mean of 50. This displays grade level proficiency, and this particular view is of the entire district, and this is using the STAR rating normal curve equivalent. So proficiency is represented from an NCE of 50 to 100, with 50 as an indicator of entry to proficiency. Okay, so where you see the green and the blue, that would be proficiency from entry to the top end of the scale of proficiency, which would be like 2 standard deviations or 3 standard deviations. So that would be fantastic. If we could just have everybody in blue, wow, we would be amazing. We wouldn't be following probably the way the bell curve goes, but that would be really nice. Well, the data represented by the yellow, orange, and red bars on the graph, or what would be considered to the left of a mark of 50 or a mean of 50, displays that grade level proficiency has not yet been achieved. Okay, so through the use of STAR and the normal curve equivalent, we are able to forecast how our students will do on the forward exam and the ACT Aspire. What we realize is we need to bring to you a data view that converts our STAR data into the assessment data for the state assessment. And that's the next project for our WISE-Local team in order to make that conversion. So you would see our district view, and then through just another view, you'd be able to see how is that going to look when our students sit down to take the forward exam. The conversion to the state NCE is based, of course, on the last state assessment. We can't, foresee how things are going to fall with the mean and the NCE moving forward, but we always look back and learn from that. And it's important for us to learn about the alignment of grade level proficiency to the expectations of the state and the college readiness performance expectations that are incorporated into the forward exam and the ACT suite. Not only is this a view we need to bring to you, but it's also a view we need to bring forward to our building principals. So, are there any questions?
Mm-hmm. I know I had a conversation with you. It's not based on past forward and Badger, well,
at least forward
exam. The proficiency rate on the forward exam does not match 50% STAR proficiency. It's higher than that. Is that correct?
So the curve itself, 50 will be the mean for both, but where you're going is that there's an elevated rigor. So, and that's where we need to provide that conversion, so that the way that it is normed through, Renaissance Learning has a database of hundreds of thousands of learners. And if you're in grade 3, third month, what should be expected of you and what would be proficient and what would be advanced proficient? On the forward exam, the state takes their information, and what might be an NCE of 50 for an entry to proficiency for us might actually be elevated, and this is where what you're alluding to, might actually come out as a 56, or might even be a 60. So it could be a quarter of a year or a half year advanced. So as we're looking at our data, we always have to keep in mind where the state has their cut points, and that's why we need that tool so you can convert that and see on how that's going to look. So good question. Thank you.
Yeah, so on this, if you took all the green and blues, it would not necessarily add up to what we experience in proficient and advanced on the forward.
You are correct.
It would be fewer because their cutoff is higher than the STAR.
You're correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was my question.
Oh. Anyone else?
Just quickly, Dr. Stramp, I think it bears noting that if you add the greens and the blues together, you get about 30% of the population that took the fall assessment at or above grade level in reading.
Correct.
They started with us in the fall. So I just think that bears noting that these are the students we have. These are the students that come to us, the levels that they're at, and our teachers do the very best they can to try to move those students to proficiency by the end of the year. But we're already talking about students who are coming to us with reading deficits at the beginning of the year.
And this is the same measure, the NCE, that we'll be bringing forward in any of our reporting now this year. So if it's AGR or it's our, looking at our dashboards, you'll have a consistent measure now that we'll be using.
Just thinking about use of the dashboard, wondering if the board might find it helpful for us to, if there were a major upload of new information, like, because some things might change on a daily basis, but once we have the winter score of the STAR finished, it might be nice for us to send an announcement so that you're aware of that. Just like I can check on my parent portal to see that my son might be missing an assignment, but the school will actually say when we have a progress report or a major change. That might be something that could be helpful. If that's something that the board would like, I think we could provide that.
Yeah.
That concludes our presentation, unless there are additional questions, comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Not questions, just two comments. First, I just want to offer a caution about any minimization of what we see with that school report card. We keep using the term snapshot, and I know it's been my experience, there's been a tendency forever to kind of minimize, particularly when we're looking at meets few expectations, some of the lower scores, and saying, well, that's just a snapshot in time. When we're saying that, we're also minimizing those folks that exceed or significantly exceed expectations, and it minimizes some of the hard work that people are doing regardless of where they are, and so that's just a caution. And to that point, even a little bit further, and you had mentioned it, Steve, there are those outliers, and you mentioned Webster School, and I'm aware that Webster is one of fewer than 70 schools out of approximately 2,500 schools that have been reported on that increased their overall score by 10 points or more. And I think those teachers and staff and Nancy Schultz, they deserve a huge shout out for that, because that's very, very significant. Despite what DPI is saying about being cautious, and I appreciate that, but they've been working very, very hard, I know, focusing on growth data in particular, so that's just worthy of note.
Very much noted, and we appreciate that, and we're happy to see the hard work overall as a district has meant a pretty significant shift in the number of schools that have increased in their scores rather than decreased. So overall, the net is really positive for the district. We just want to make sure that we're not looking at it as the only measure, but great work has been done by our staff, great work has been done by our administrators, and most importantly, great learning is being done by our students.
So certainly it's not the only one, but like it or not, it's the one that everybody in the state is held to, regardless of where they are, and I mean, that's the reality.
And if I could just speak to Webster briefly, I can recall having conversations with Nancy Schultz when the report cards came out last year. And, she had talked about, what steps could she take and what could she do. I know she worked quite a bit with her supervisor, Ann Barsh, in looking at her school improvement processes and how they could focus on growth. And I do know that Dr. Stramp became an integrated member of their team in looking at how they could refine the data that they were looking at and what they were doing. And I have to believe that both of those individuals as well contributed to the improvements at that school. So
I agree.
Anything else? Thank you.
Are you done? Yes, yeah, okay, all right. Thanks. Next, we have our superintendent's update. I'll turn that over to Dr. Langenfeld.
Thank you. I'd like to begin with the calendar. We're starting with winter recess, beginning on the 23rd through the 1st of the year. We'll welcome the new year on January 1st, and then classes resume on January 2nd. On January 8th, we have the Teaching and Learning Work Session meeting at 5:30 with the organizational support work session immediately following. And I want to just share something with the board. We originally had intended to bring you a document this month on December 8th that we'll be bringing forward at that January 8th meeting focused on the Washington Middle School Fine Arts Institute. As you recall, we have had a team really looking at Washington Middle School in terms of what that fine arts strand would look like, how to improve that. We passed a piece of the referendum to focus on improvements in that particular school around the fine arts. And what we found is that we didn't bring it forward in December because of some of the construction delays, so we knew that we wouldn't be ready to present this as intended because we knew the facility wouldn't be ready at opening this fall. So a team went back and retooled and reset a bit, so there's like an additional phase so that we could phase in a few more infusions of opportunities for kids next year, and then start to gear up even more the following several years as planned with the Institute at Washington. So again, just that pathway is being more developed. We had intended to bring forward a more robust offering for next fall, but because of construction, we would not be able to do that until the following fall, full implementation goal of 2020. So I wanted to put that on your radar and let you know that we'll send that via email to you and then be able to answer questions even before the January 8th meeting if we can. Because the sooner we can move this forward, the sooner that smaller phase, and it involves, the proposal is really to create a school within a school, a little fine arts house in the 6th grade is really what's intended, with a couple of unique course offerings for that group. So a small until we get to the larger version, but we want to bring that forward. So that'll be on January 8th. On January 10th, we have the district-wide boundary task force meeting. And again, all of that information that the district-wide boundary task force is looking at is posted on our website. So if folks are interested, that is there and available to them. And as more information comes forward and that team looks deeper into the boundaries, anyone can access that. And at the end of that meeting, on the 10th at 8 o'clock, for anyone inclined from the public who would like to, you're welcome to come at 6 o'clock and observe, and then at 8 o'clock, if there are any community members who would like to offer input or ask questions, can certainly do that at the end of the meeting as well, and we welcome that. January 15th is our regular board meeting. And then on January 17th through 19th, it's the Wisconsin Association of School Boards Convention in Milwaukee. And the closed session for the superintendent's performance evaluation is the 22nd. And then the 29th is a special board meeting and retreat. And I believe that's around finance. So we'll have that available to you. So that would be the calendar, the upcoming calendar for the month of, end of this month and into January.
Michelle?
Yep.
Do you know if they're planning on rescheduling or adding another meeting to the boundary task force because of the one that was canceled last week because of weather?
That's an excellent question, and yes, in the earlier discussions that I had today, the intention is to talk with and see if there'd be 2 in March, I believe, was the discussion, so that they would be adding another to make sure that we had that team up and where they need to be and want to be. So
Thank you.
I went to I do have a success story, and what's interesting about our high schools, and we talked about the assessment and being a point in time, sometimes the ACT score on the state assessment may not reflect everything going on in the high school. And I received this from a community member who spends time at West High School. And this came right after the state assessment came out, and he talked about, and he said I could share that with us tonight, but he said he had an opportunity to visit with the principal at West High School and get to places he didn't always get to see, and he refers to himself as the owner. He said an owner's visit at West is a little different than at other schools because he's already there every Tuesday tutoring. But he said my Monday visit completes the sequence. He visited all the IB schools. He went to Chapel, to Franklin, and he was glad to see the continuity of the IB culture. He said this visit was also interesting because the state school report cards were released in the midst of making arrangements. I could not follow the political gyrations that led to the current scoring, and it remains obscure to me what expectations the politicians asked DPI to measure. And then he goes on to say, actually, the report cards are official false advertising because they don't support the two uses of the public want for a report card. They don't allow for fair comparisons between schools, and they don't provide any information about the quality of the education an incoming freshman can expect. Some expectations that I have for near adults, the young people, were fulfilled by the language arts students I observed. These students described the tasks that they were currently engaged in. They asked questions about those tasks which were clear and relevant. They listened to queries from the visitors about their work and responded with very helpful information. Many of them had clear opinions, which they not only stated, but explained. In other words, they demonstrated the skills I would expect at work in involuntary associations. I'm comfortable turning over the world to them. Then he concludes with, or rather, I'm comfortable with these kids taking over the world. I'm uneasy about the world we're turning over to them. So anyway, just to share that with you, but it does tell an important story that we invite people to come into our schools to come and see, because to everyone's point, there is a tremendous amount of good work, and the report card may or may not reflect everything that's going on. So we always invite individuals to come in, and just as this gentleman has stated, he spent the time and to see what's really going on, and we would welcome that and invite that from any community member as well, because there's good stuff going on in all of our schools. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Next is our Intercity Student Council report. I'll turn that over to Grace.
All right, hello. I'm just going to be telling you guys about the good things going on in our schools since the last time I updated you. So we'll start out with John Dewey. So they will actually, on Wednesday, they will be hosting school at the Brown County Library in order to work together to create a new vision for their school, which I think is really awesome. And some students went and toured NWTC the past week to see the facilities and understand more about future careers that are possible through a technical education. And they had their event night on November 30th, which is a really big deal to their school. It's what they work towards all years, these several event nights that they have. It's where they can showcase to the community what they've been doing and really all the hard things that they've been working on throughout the year thus far. Now on to East. They had their Equate art show and concerts, and that was with East High School, Washington Middle School, Langlade, and Webster, so all of those schools combined. Their boys basketball team is doing...
All the elementary feeder schools participate.
Oh, okay, sorry. That's just the list she gave me, sorry. And, okay, so then the boys basketball are doing much better this year than they normally do. They did win a game in overtime, which is very exciting. And the girls basketball team is quite a young team this year. They have several freshmen and sophomores. So they're busy, figuring out how to play high school basketball and really work together as a team. And they're getting better with every practice.
All those building years.
Yes. And they also recently had a canned food drive, which they collected a lot of canned foods and donated them. And they also have something that they like to call Teacher Tea, and their student council is putting that on. And they set up a breakfast for all their teachers, and their band comes and plays. And it's the last day before winter break, so that's coming up soon. And it's just to appreciate the teachers and thank them for all that they've done and all that they're doing for them, and just general teacher appreciation. And they also have a new tutoring program going on after school, which is also then in turn helping them get more attendance for the dinner program that was just started there. So both of those are helping the academics and helping students to get another meal in. For West, they just had a blood drive, and what's really exciting is it was so successful that they are going to have a third one this year. They normally only have 2, but because they're collecting so many pints of blood, they decided to have another one. I don't want to say this name wrong. I think it's Jaslyn Kohler was featured in a Nicolay Banks Senior Scholar Program, which is really exciting. Southwest, as you know, they just finished their musical, The Book of Empty Pages, and since it's their 50th year of music, they are doing 2 musicals this year. So they did just start practices for Les Miserables, so they will be putting that one on soon as well. They as well are adding another blood drive because they collected so many pints of blood. And the Troyettes won both of their competitions that they have been a part of, which is amazing. They are a really amazing dance team. Their student council is planning their Dude Be Nice Week, which, if you don't know, that is based off a teacher that worked there, and they create a video about all the nice things going on at Southwest, and the students and the teachers and the whole community at Southwest doing nice things for each other. And all of their clubs are doing nice things for the teachers within the school, and so that's once again just giving back to the teachers and reciprocating what they give to us. And lastly, for Preble, our dance team, we had a duet take first place, and as well we had Michaela Eberhardt, who took first place in her solo. And our dance team actually took first at their Little Shoot competition, which is really exciting. And our wrestling is doing very well. I know they beat GBU, and they just had a invitational against Bayport. And for our blood drive, we actually did extremely well. We got 85 pints of blood, which is one of the record highs that we've ever had. We had, we're only allowed to sign up 100 people, and we had like a waiting list of over 50 people. So it's really amazing to see the generosity that people have. And actually the day after musical ended, our show choirs began. So they're busy, hard working on those routines and sets, and they will have their first showcase in January. And that is all I have.
All right, thank you guys. Next is Legislative Liaison Report. I'll turn that over to Laura.
We have 3 different items. The first being the Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding and an attachment that goes with that. On December 14th, the Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding met for the first time. It was formed by Assembly Speaker Robin Voss and is headed by Representative Joel Kitchens of Sturgeon Bay and the Senate Education Committee Chairman Luther Olson of Ripon. Your attachment should show the complete list of members on the panel, which include our own superintendent, Dr. Michelle Langenfeld. The goal of the panel is to examine how tax dollars are distributed to schools in Wisconsin and to make recommendations to better meet the needs of students across the state. And just reading from the attachment, quote, the school funding formula was first created in the 1970s, and a review hasn't been done in 20 years, said Speaker Voss. Times have changed, state demographics have changed, and of course, schools have changed. It's time to examine the way we pay for schools. This is a step in the right direction. Michelle, you attended that first meeting. Mm-hmm. Can you just give a brief first impression?
You know, I think there is a real commitment from the legislators leading this, and the legislators on the commission to make change. I believe it was stated by Senator Olson, it's not to collect dust on the shelf. I think there is a shared understanding from the presentations, both from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau as well as from the Department of Public Instruction, that we are not in a place that supports, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but certainly my takeaway was that there were plenty of people there that recognized that the school funding formula is not successfully and equitably. I believe the words were adequate and equitable by Representative Pope, talking about how we support children and families in terms of their education. A clear recognition that there are some school districts and students in school districts, by just nature of where they are living, that they are receiving significantly more dollars than others. Recognition that special needs students are not fully funded, and yet there are mandates. And so the revenue limits have not shifted to address changes in demographics or individual student or district needs. So I believe there's a real strong commitment to making a difference. And I think that the other piece in our discussion, and I know it's come up in a number of areas, is the number of voices that aren't on that commission, but where those voices can be heard. Because I believe there's a great interest in making sure that the people in the trenches delivering the high-quality education, who struggle day in and day out because they don't have the resources they need to have those resources. I believe that the business community is saying, you know, we need to equitably fund public education because the future workforce is dependent on high-quality, successful students coming out. So a lot of interest in that as well.
The schedule for future meetings will be coming out soon, I believe, and the public will be able to attend.
The public will be invited to attend, and it'll be a hearing format from what I understand. I also understand everything will be posted so that people can see what's and follow along. I know that there was a series of documents that I shared out with the board over the weekend that were provided to me, but they will be supposedly posted on this website in early January as well. Obviously, there are things that the Fiscal Bureau and the Department of Public Instruction shared at the meeting, and it's something we can make available. I know I copied Sandy if anybody else who's listening would like them. Otherwise, in January, we'll make sure that everyone knows where that website is. But I do know that there's a lot of people, you know, I said to the folks, you can't see all the people who stand on our shoulders and are standing behind me, and we're really needing some significant change, and that zip codes where children live should not determine the quality of education that they receive because of the resources supported or not supported. So,
is the commission planning to meet in Madison only, or is there plans to take it around the state at all?
I'm understanding there's plans to take it around the state, and I'm understanding, and it would make sense to me that, you know, I can certainly forward on a request to have a hearing in this area as well.
I think that'd be great.
And I know that we've had the Legislative Fiscal Bureau or the legislative group, the finance team come.
Joint finance.
Yeah, school,
finance
joint
committee.
finance come, and they actually did a whole listening session at Lambeau a number of years ago, so it drew quite a crowd. Mr. Dorff is smiling, he was one of the speakers. So anyway, but to that end, I think it really affords a broader conversation. I know that it would afford then this whole area and region to weigh in, and there's a lot of interest, especially in Brown County, with the recognition that out of the 9 school districts, 8 of them are not receiving funding at even the state average through the revenue limits, and that's an important discussion that has to change, you know. So,
All right.
so I'll put that out there and send it to Senator Olson and Representative
Do you know,
Kitchens.
do you have
Keep going,
an
clay
idea
fish
of
in my
when
head.
when the work might be completed?
Oh, I think it's before the next session, so it's going to take a while, and that's
Through
why,
the spring of next year?
before they move into the fall, I would think, when they open up the new session, wrap the budget and move into the fall. Trying to think of when he said, it's about a 2-year, before we go into the next budget. Yeah, the next biennium, so it's about 2 years, but that should all be on there too, and I know Representative Kitchens said it, but I've got to go back and look. They originally thought they would do just a limited number of hearings, but I think based on the conversations, there's a great interest.
Will there be an election during that time? I mean, that makes a difference.
Johnson, yeah, there will be.
Right?
Yeah, in November, there will be. Yep, there will be. So,
And that affects everything.
Everything.
Number 2 on the agenda, the Teacher Protection Act has been, or the so-called Teacher Protection Act has been sent to the Judiciary Committee, which is strange because it's an education bill. However, the new rules of the Assembly require that bills authored by the committee's chair should not then go to the chair's own committee. The author of the bill, Representative Jeremy Thiesfeld, is the chair of the Education Committee. So to avoid a problem with the rules, it has been sent to the Judiciary Committee, where he's also a member but not the chair. So there's no Senate companion bill assigned yet, and no state senators have signed on as co-sponsors. And as I've mentioned before, the WASB opposes this bill as drafted.
So either side, there's no co-sponsors at all? Either side of it?
I believe that in the Assembly there are some, but not in the Senate.
Senate.
It was like 11 or 15 co-signers in the
In the
Assembly.
Assembly.
11, I think, was I saw
Yeah.
the last.
Are they waiting to see where it goes in committee?
Maybe. There doesn't seem to be an enormous amount of support for this bill.
But
So-
what does the 11 people that have signed on look like? Is it is it split, or is it
That I
2-9?
Hang on, I don't know
You
if I
mean as
have
far as
that.
Right.
party affiliation?
I mean, if it's
I
2-9,
believe-
that's support for me.
I'm pretty sure it was 11, and if I remember correctly, all 11 were Republicans.
Okay.
I don't think there's any bipartisan support for it at this point.
But I mean,
But don't quote me on that,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just
That was
my,
my impression as
okay.
well.
okay. But they don't necessarily need it to be bipartisan to get it through.
No, true enough, but, I mean, that's what I saw. At least that's what I remember.
Right.
I could be totally wrong.
Don't quote you? Is that what
Don't
you're
quote me.
saying?
It
Okay.
was somewhere between 11 and 15,
Okay.
and I was pretty sure it was all from one side of
Okay.
the aisle.
Okay. The third item is the GOA report on voucher impact that also had an attachment, and shows the summary of recent government accountability office report that focuses on accountability and information about voucher schools and the rights for students with disabilities. Wisconsin Representatives Mark Pocan and Gwen Moore were part of the group that requested the GOA report and examined 27 voucher and education savings account programs across the country, including Wisconsin, for the 2016-17 school year. I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone that they found, quote, overall private school voucher programs lack consistency in their accountability mechanisms and do not provide sufficient information to the public. In particular, private school voucher programs fail to provide necessary or accurate information to parents of students with disabilities about the rights those students forfeit by enrolling at a private voucher school, unquote. And that's all I have. Any questions?
I'm not sure if I can ask this question because we discussed it at the last meeting, and you can tell me that I can't. But there was discussion about a tax bill and having some accountability with what that looks like?
Oh, that was
That
the
resolution that's
the
on our,
resolution
that's on
that
our
we're
agenda.
gonna
Okay,
talk about.
we're gonna get to
Yeah,
that, okay,
it's the first item under business and finance.
Okay.
So we'll get that.
okay,
Yes. you
Yes.
can.
Yes,
You
you
can
can
ask
ask
okay.
in a few minutes.
okay. I was skipping, sorry.
That completes my report.
All right, thank you, Laura. Next, board member school visits. Does anyone want to share visits? Andrew?
Thank you. Unfortunately, earlier this year, I wasn't able to be on quite the pace that I wanted to be with my school visits, so I made up for that last week, and I visited Early Learning Center, Wilder, Jefferson, Tank, Washington, and Martin. And I guess, a couple highlights in addition to some, I always like to get, spend some time with students in the lunchroom, get some questions. So I do owe an answer to Ms. Wolt's class at Jefferson about what happened with egg rolls, and then a facilities question for Mrs. Stott's class at Wilder about hand soap. So in addition to those that I'm working on, I think probably the thing that impressed me as I toured these schools, I think, is the how well students of very different backgrounds and ability levels seem to get along and work together really well. And I saw that, I especially noticed at Jefferson, there happened to be a music concert going on. And you had, the thing I remember is that there was a student with pretty significant special needs, needed to wear some protective gear and so forth, and had a had a student standing right next to her, making sure that she knew as many words as she could do, and clapped along for the clapping part and gave her a pat on the shoulder and told her good job. And at first I thought, pretty nice, pretty nice kid, that's cool. I learned later that there actually is kind of a buddy program that they do to make sure that they're able to the greatest extent possible, that everyone can participate. And that just resonated with me as being a pretty just a pretty big deal that they're doing that. And that concert I saw there really was for everybody. I went to Tank. I saw, and I met with Mrs. Van Pay. Her office was just crowded with a bunch of presents for families who maybe need help with non-Santa gifts this time of year. And so there were a bunch of those presents there. It was hard to squeezed in and met with her, and then a very good discussion about what's really going right at Tank. I met with their school counselor, Mr. McKenzie.
Sean McKenzie.
Yeah, and Sean was amazing. Didn't really hard pressed to get him to take any credit for his role at all. I had to kind of pull that out a little bit, but that's his position and him being able to be at that school is a very important piece of why they're doing so well. I also learned that we have kind of a second year of a program for higher, I guess you call it higher needs autism students at Martin. And that seemed to be going pretty well with the mix of students and staff that they had. And Mrs. Shepard told me a bit about that. So I really enjoyed it. I hope to be back to that represents all but one of the schools on my regular list, and then I visit a couple other ones as well. So it's nice to be back in the swing with those.
I had a chance to attend an all-school assembly at King, and Diane Stelmach gave me a great tour of the facility as we were waiting for the kids to assemble in the gym, and it was in 2 honor school attendance. And they had several students with perfect attendance for this was held at the end of November. And as a reward for the perfect attendance, several teachers volunteered to be models, and they had runways set up, and teams of students were allowed to dress the models. Now, granted, the models did bring their own costume options, so they had some control, but it was there was a lot of energy, and it was just a good feeling in the school. And then I had the opportunity to attend Beauty and the Beast Junior at Aldo. And that was a great production. I think Trina is here, and Trina Lambert, and she did a great job introducing and acknowledging the Aldo students' participation in a lot of the musicals at East. And I know in the program at East, there's always an ad from the Aldo parents or the Aldo staff congratulating the Aldo students who are participating in the musical. And it was a well-done and a lot of student energy, a lot of parent energy, which is pretty typical of Aldo. It was a fun event.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I had the unexpected pleasure today of getting a little tour through the Preble Culinary Program. I stopped by to get my cookies that I bought from them, yes. I expected to be in and out in 5 minutes, but I got a nice tour. The place was a beehive of activity because they were still baking cookies, and today was the last day to pick them up. So
Still baking?
they were when I was there midday. I got to see their storeroom and talk about various aspects of that program. I hadn't been there yet to see that, so that was great. I enjoyed it. So.
It's not one of my assigned schools this year, but I had an opportunity to get a real nice tour and visit at Lombardi Middle School last week. Both of my kids went through Lombardi, so I should have known the school better than what I did, but I saw nooks and crannies that I hadn't seen. But I was very impressed with what's going on there, with their planning around where they want to go with science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And Jim explained everything that they've got planned, and he was very complimentary about the support that he's receiving from some of the folks in the room right now. But it was very, very impressive. The other thing, and I won't specifically name schools, but Christmas time, this time of year, this week especially, our schools that serve a lot of the underprivileged or less privileged families have a rough time this week. It's very, very rough. Last week when we were at the city council, Michelle, you and I, and Vicki, and we were there to talk about what we thought was going to be some rather egregious moves on the part of the city to deny housing. As it turned out, they backed away from that. But I learned then from Vicki that there's over 1,000 kids in the district right now who are categorized as homeless, and the number itself is staggering, but put a percentage on that. We've got 20,000. That's 5% of our student population. And the teachers and the staff, and I know there's a lot of support coming from their supervisors down here at this time of year, really means a lot. But it's a tough time, and people are just going above and beyond. So I know that's not specific to one school. That's all the schools.
I spent an hour and a half at Lincoln in their 3rd grade literacy block, so I always find it interesting to see what we talk about at the table in action. And I had met with their literacy team a few weeks prior to that, maybe a month prior to that, and so then it was just, it's always interesting to me because it's, when you talk about it at the table, there isn't kids, involved and the quirky things that kids do and sort of upend your perfect plan for the day and things like that. But there was a lot of reading going on and a lot of really good engagement on the part of the students that were in that classroom that day, so that was fun. And then I also attended, not my school, two things at East, the Academy Thanksgiving dinner, which was fun, and then also they had a career fair, which is the first time they've done it this way, where they did it right as a prelude to signing up for their courses for 10th graders. And they had universities and also I think all of the departments at NWTC had representatives around the table, or they each had tables. So it was a chance for students to really kind of talk to people, get to know what's available, and then they were encouraged to pick, one of the concurrent credit courses or something like that, from that day. And so they were given an assignment. So it'll be interesting to see how that was. If the people that put it together felt that it was worth the extra effort to do that, if it really bumped the students' interest or not. So, but I learned a lot. I walked around, talked to a lot of,
It was
lot
really
of people.
fantastic. They had the 2 trailers out there.
So it was good. And then Rhonda, you had your hand up?
I went to Baird, and I couldn't get over how creative they have become with their space that they have, that they're able to really function, and just some of the things that they've come up with to do that, and how they're looking forward to the construction happening. But I also wanted to give a shout out to the Intercity Student Council meeting that I had went to this week. First time for me, and I was so impressed with the group, how they were able to articulate their needs and advocate for their concerns, and gave me a lot of hope for the future. That was really a great thing to see.
They're an impressive bunch of kids, yeah.
All right, we'll move on then to district events, sort of winding up the year here, but is there anything anyone wants to announce?
I just want to give a shout out to all of the music, orchestra, fine arts. The performances have been absolutely breathtaking. I think beginning with the Quake concert in November, kind of kicking off the season, and having been in a school for many years, and you see the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, and our students just have beautiful performances at all levels. I know there's a few more still even going on, and I know that last week when we closed a little bit early and didn't do the night activities, I probably sent some in not a swell place, but we just didn't want to we wanted to make sure safety was the priority. But I do want to give a note of gratitude to all of the staff and administration and parents and students who worked really hard to make the concert season a huge success. And there's nothing but very positive things that I've heard and seen myself, and I think we have a few more to attend yet, but Grace is ready to add, so that's good too. Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
thought of this actually, along with the music. Our choir right now is at the Children's Hospital, and they are caroling throughout the hallways, and I just think that's really amazing that they're doing that, and it's all volunteer, but I heard that most of the choir is going just to be good people and bring joy.
When are you, in Milwaukee?
Oh, no,
the one right here.
Yep, and,
Okay.
yeah.
That's very nice. And I know that if you watched Facebook, there's a couple of things you can see groups of students have been out and about with our community as well.
Yeah.
Which is great. So, anyway.
All right.
Hopefully everyone will be getting some nice rest soon.
Next, we will move to our system reports. First, it's teaching and learning, and that'll be facilitated by Ed Dorff.
Thank you. We have 5 action items. Before we get to those, I just want to mention that at our work session, as a part of our work session, we did go through some information from our engagement and climate work group, and We had an excellent presentation from Claudia Hendrickson and her associates on seclusion and restraints, and there were a lot of good questions and very edifying session that we had on that. Then we moved on. We have, as I said, 5 action items, and I'll start with the proposed course updates. I'd move that the proposed course updates for the 2018-19 school year as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Sitnikov? Aye. Becker?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye. Carried 6-0.
Co-curricular activities policy 370, move that the co-curricular policy 370 as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
McCoy?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikov? Aye. Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
Move that the employee health examinations policy 523.1 as presented be approved.
Second.
And there's been changes since our last
There's
meeting.
been quite a few changes, and I'll just talk as Jean walks over here. As luck would have it, before we could approve this policy, the legislature passed a law that changed a school district's administration of TB tests to remove the requirement of the actual TB test and to implement a screening to determine if there are risk factors for TB, and if there are no risk factors, then a prospective employee is not tested. So the large changes in the policy you'll see is to reflect the change away from the actual test to the screen. And we have discussed with our clinic, our on-site clinic, how to implement this, and they are ready to implement that.
This is considered a positive change. I think because of the relatively low incidence of TB, people who might work in more than one district with the 90-day requirement that they have a TB test would be tested, and we could not accept a TB test that was 91 days ago. And so in this way, the nurse or the care provider screens using a form that the state has provided, and if the risk factors are absent, they can, with a physical examination, can clear the employee to start. If any of the risk factors are present, then they move on to a test.
Do you have a copy of the screen? Is that in?
It's not there, but I have one with me, if anybody wants to see it. It's provided by the state.
It's statutory by the Department of Public Health.
Could you shoot me a copy of that?
Would a district still have the option of requiring the testing?
No.
No.
The statute's very clear that only those who are screened and present the risk factors will be tested.
What are the risk factors? Could you?
Sure. Why don't I'll see if I can find my copy here, which I believe I have. You ask, one of the questions I believe is you ask the person if they've been out of the country. There are some states, if they resided in certain states where the incidence is higher, the cough, the nurse screens for the symptoms of TB, the night sweats, the cough. The practitioner is required to listen to the heart and lungs as part of the screening. And, if everything is negative, then they can clear the person. What they're really asking for is, they're looking really for active TB. They're not going to catch the latent TB. They'll catch the active.
Is there a question on there whether or not they tested positive?
Yes.
Tested positive?
Yeah, I think I have it here. Would you like to? Here's the form that comes back. This is the Previa form. Would you like me to just read the questions to you? I have them here. Or would you just want to see them?
Yeah, I was just curious if the positive test was one of the, in which case then we would, what are our options if someone tests positive?
It says, yes, history of positive TB or TB disease, or have they ever been treated for TB disease or infection? And these are yes, no questions. And then there are 5 additional questions.
Any other questions? Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
Sitnikov? Aye. Maloney?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye. Carried 6-0.
Move that student teaching and internships policy 892.1 and guidelines for student teaching and internships rule 892.1 rule be approved.
Second?
Sandy?
Warren?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
And that's all we've got.
All right, thanks, Ed. Next is organizational support, and that'll be facilitated by Andrew Becker.
And I will move that the resolution in support of the Wisconsin voucher transparency bill as presented be approved.
Second.
Oh, second. Is there any, we saw this 2 weeks ago. Are there any questions, comments? She had
Yep, no.
mentioned.
I didn't know if you wanted me to say something about John.
Someone was discussing this with me in the community, and they had mentioned that they felt, and they support voucher programs, and have kids attending private schools, that they don't believe there's room on a tax bill for that. What would you say to that?
Like space?
Yeah.
Physical room?
Right. What would you say to that? I mean, I don't know if that's just scraping for something, but.
I don't know how to respond to that. They found space to put what you saw
Right.
on your tax bill this year. So
There-
I would think you could.
I had room on my tax bill.
I think there was on mine too.
Yeah,
there was on mine.
I think there's plenty of room to put it.
There was on mine.
I'm just saying, and, they're a board member actually for a private school, so that is out there. So,
That's interesting.
It would fit.
I didn't doubt that it wouldn't. I'm just saying that's where your resistance is.
Did you want to say anything or introduce John?
No, I didn't know if John had any additional comments, and I just...
No, I didn't. I just wanted to be able to answer questions.
All right.
If anyone had any.
And Lori, will we put this on our website? Under,
So my thought is that if we do the press release that we talked about, we can send out a press release with a resolution. Press releases are automatically on our website.
Oh,
so
okay.
we put out- But then I thought we would probably post it on social as well, so that a little bit more exposure.
okay. You ready to vote? Okay, Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
McCoy? Becker?
Aye.
Carried 6-0. Thank you, John.
And I move that Herkman Mechanical Industries be awarded the bid for mechanical renovation work at Edison Middle School as presented. Be approved.
Second. Sandy?
McCoy?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Carried 6-0, sorry.
I move that Herkman Mechanical Industries be awarded the bid for insulation work at Edison Middle School as presented. Be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
I move that Belco Balancing, Inc. be awarded the bid for air and water balancing renovation work at Edison Middle School as presented. Be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
Move that Eland Electric Corporation be awarded the bid for electrical work at Edison Middle School as presented. Be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
McCoy?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Maloney?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
I move that the employment of Stephanie Elwood as an accountant, 12 months in the district office as presented. Be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Maloney?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
McCoy?
Carried 6-0. I don't think Stephanie's not here, is she? No, okay.
I move that the table of organization be modified to reflect the addition of a 1.0 volunteer community partner coordinator, 11 months, and that the associate job description as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Warren?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
McCoy?
Aye.
Sitnikov? Maloney? Dorf?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
Move that the 2018-19 school calendar as presented be approved.
Second.
Sandy?
Maloney? Warren?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Sitnikov? McCoy? Becker?
Aye.
Carried 6-0.
And I move the consent agenda as listed.
Second.
Sandy?
McCoy?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Becker?
Aye.
Warren?
Aye.
Maloney? Sitnikov?
Carried 6-0. We do have a closed session. I will read that motion. Special board meeting closed session has been scheduled for Monday, December 18th, immediately following the adjournment of the regular board meeting pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85F, considering financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except where paragraph B applies, which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such histories or data involved in such problems or investigations, to wit, personnel matters. And pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, more specifically, to wit, potential contracts. The meeting will begin in open session to consider the appropriate motion for a closed session so provided by law.
So moved.
Second.
Sandy?
Becker?
Aye.
Dorf?
Aye.
Maloney? McCoy?
Aye.
Sitnikov?
Aye. Carried 6-0. We will move across the hall.